Morning.
Morning.
Um, we have a fun potpourri of topic today for us. H401 has come back from the Senate that we're going to spend a few moments on. There are some details related to the school construction language in 484 that want folks to be aware of. And H481 came back from the Senate with an amendment that we need to take a look at. So we're hoping to do that all this morning. And then if S124 is voted out of House Natural Resources this morning, we'll work on that after the floor along with S12. So we will be back here after the floor votes. And with that, Katie, would you like to join us? Thank you.
Good morning. Katie McLean, Office of Legislative Counsel. Let me pull up the draft.
Thank you.
First, let me refresh your memory. This was a bill that pertained to food establishments, food manufacturing establishments. There are some underneath a certain threshold of earnings that don't need to obtain a license or pay a licensure fee. So you have looked at the House's proposal and the Senate is sending back a different proposal. The concept is the same, which is to increase the threshold, up to $30,000 so that a home producer who has gross receipts under $30,000 does not need a license or to pay a licensure fee. But the way of getting there is a little bit different. The Senate worked with the health department to look at what other states were doing, and other states are creating a category called cottage food products, which is defined in this bill. And so that new category would be exempt up to 30,000. So instead of sort of using the existing categories and exempting certain amounts of the existing categories, this creates just a new category. I'm going to skip over the legislative intent. Here are our new definitions. So a cottage food operator is a person who produces or packages cottage food products solely in the home kitchen of the person's private residential dwelling or a kitchen in the person's personal property. And then we have a definition of what a cottage food product is. It means food sold by a cottage food operator that does not require refrigeration or time or temperature control for safety. And then we have a list of examples, such as non-potentially hazardous. Okay. So here is the list.
Which is just an example list, yeah?
It's a list of examples.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
and it has a catch-all that the
Talk about pickles.
there was a lot of conversation about pickles on this. But there's a catch-all that the department and ruler policy might expand upon this list. Then we have renumbering of the rest of the definition section. There is new rulemaking language that directs the Department of Health to adopt rules on training requirements for food manufacturing establishment operators, employees. And then we get to the fees. Oops, oh shoot. Did that pop up?
No.
Oh, it didn't. Great. I'm glad my inbox wasn't displayed for everybody. Okay, so that brings us to the fees section. So the existing fees language, non-bakeries, currently has language right here at the top of page 7, gross receipts of $10,000 or less are exempt pursuant to section 4358 of this title. That doesn't change in this version of the bill. Non-bakeries would still be exempt up to $10,000 from the license or the licensure fee. Then we have bakeries, And we're just maintaining existing law with regard to bakeries. We're not having a specific exemption for them because we have this new category, cottage food operations. And if you notice, the first item on the list of examples under cottage food products is non-potentially hazardous baked goods. So most of the bakery products that are home produced are going to be captured under this category, cottage food operations. So this category, gross receipts of 30,000 or less from the sale of cottage food products are exempt from this pursuant to 4358 of this
Can
title.
you remind me what the financial threshold for the exemption was? When we sent it over, not like in current law, but when we sent it over to the Senate.
It was 30,000.
Okay, great.
For both, but
Okay.
it was for bakeries and non-bakery products provided produced at home.
Okay.
And then we have exemption language, which looks a little different from the last time you've seen it, but it pretty much says what I've already said. That there's no obligation to obtain a license or pay the associated licensure fee for a cottage food operation or other food manufacturing establishment that's exempt under the fees section that we just looked at. And then we have language, it's already a requirement that if you are not getting a license or a licensure fee, paying the licensure fee, that you have to provide documentation to the Department of Health that you're selling food that you're producing in your home kitchen. This isn't changing that requirement. It's giving it a different name and calling it a licensing exemption filing. And there's language specifying that this filing is to include an attestation that the food producer has completed the training that's required in rule. And the health department has indicated that that training would mostly be like an online platform to take whatever training is required. There's new rulemaking language. As you know, rulemaking can take 9 months to a year. And there was an interest in allowing folks, particularly folks who might be selling food at farmers markets this season, to take advantage of these licensing exemptions. So this language says, while permanent rules are pending, that the department is to put emergency rules in place that will have been deemed to meet the emergency rulemaking standard. So that way this exemption could take place this summer, and that the permanent rulemaking process would continue to take effect in the coming year. That's it.
Any questions?
So the exemption is for these small home bakeries, as long as they don't make 30,000 or more dollars or more, the exemption is for them.
Not just bakeries, though. It could be a variety of products.
The pickles, the jellies,
Pickles, the jellies, candy,
Yeah, what about-
granola,
donuts.
donuts be a bakery product.
Okay, because some of them aren't baked, they're fried.
Oh, well, this would be a better question for the health department than for me, but the donuts came up in House Ag yesterday, and the health department said donuts would fall under cottage food products.
Perfect.
Food processing.
What was that?
Food processing might be is that a helpful overarching?
Maybe.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Kimball.
I just have a question on section 4, item C, manufacturing establishments, gross receipts or less from the sale of cottage food products are exempt. Exempt from what?
License and licensure fee.
Okay, so we're not talking about exemption from any kind of sales taxes, income taxes, or anything else. Okay,
When this cross-reference is 4358.
Yeah.
And when we go to 4358, right here on line 14, the obligation to obtain a license and the associated licensure fees and the subchapter shall not apply to. So that's the exemption
okay,
that's being cross-referenced.
all right, great, thank you.
And what about testing the water and having someone examine the kitchen? Is that still gonna happen? Health department?
For products that are falling outside of the exemption. Better question for the health department. I was thinking, no, I don't know. Jess is able to answer that
They
question.
would not be, have a visit from.
Have an inspection? I'm not sure about that. So we're wondering for cottage food producers, is there an inspection if they're falling outside of the license and licensure fee.
Jessica Shimano, Policy Director, Department of Health, and any entity that's exempt from the license or licensure fees would not be subject to inspections.
And under current law, how is that working right now?
I assume it is the same, but the threshold is lower.
So there are folks who are exempt now,
It's just that they're earning under 6,500 if they're baked good or 10,000 if they're non-bakery item.
and so when we voted the bill out before, we essentially were setting up the same exemptions that we have here. They've just sort of structured it in a fancier way. Okay. Thanks, Katie. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Please take us through any changes to the fiscal? Thanks.
I'm Stephanie, joint fiscal office. There we go. So Pledge Council just walked through kind of the substantive changes and the content of the bill, rather than creating new exemptions across all of the existing categories under current law of food producers. The new bill, as recommended or as passed by the Senate, would instead create a new definition of food producer, food manufacturing establishment operator, cottage food producers, as well as definitions for cottage food products, cottage food operations, and it would apply a $30,000 threshold for exemption from permitting, from licensure and license fees for those cottage food operators with annual gross receipts under $30,000. The original fiscal note found a de minimis fiscal impact to the Department of Health's Food and Lodging Fund, which is the special fund where all of these fees we're talking about are deposited. And that finding hasn't changed as a result of the Senate version of the bill. Even though we created a new definition of product, cottage food products, the universe of current fee payers that we're talking about is largely unchanged. So at the bottom of the fiscal note, you'll see a table, and this was in the fiscal note for the House passed bill as well, showing some of the different relevant categories of fee payers under this bill. And really, when we're talking about cottage food operators, the relevant categories are food manufacturing establishments that are non-bakeries with gross receipts between $10,000 and $50,000. That's under current law. And food manufacturing establishments that are home bakeries. And under the House passed version of the bill, those were the two categories that would have seen fee decreases as a result of that new larger exemption. And that's still the case for this. We would expect most of the new fee payers under the cottage food operators definition to come from these two categories. Together, these two categories contributed around $26,000 to the food and lodging fee fund in fiscal year 2024. That's out of an overall picture of $1.48 million that were paid into that same fund from the variety of fees that go into it. So we're talking about a very small fraction of the fees that go into the Department of Health's food and lodging fund still.
Any question?
So the amount of, I'm sorry. So the amount of money is really quite small. And our job is to look at money and revenue and make sure ends are being meeting. And my concern here about safety, because they're not testing the water, I should just forget it and maybe ask it on the floor.
Probably. Or maybe even someone else, but before the floor. Whatever works for you.
Good thought.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And so there are no. I was a little distracted for a moment while you were speaking. I'm sorry, but I heard that there wasn't a change in revenue impact from what we sent over.
It's still de minimis. I mean, we have tweaked the universe of people slightly, but the overall impact is still de minimis. And Representative, just having read the bill, one thing I can point out to your question is that home producers, cottage food operators would still be required under this bill to complete some kind of training safety and health and safety training for their operations.
Okay,
I believe the exact requirements that are to be defined in rulemaking under the directives of the bill, but just to offer one detail in response to your question on the bill. It's health and safety.
Thank you. Folks, we don't have possession, so, let's do a straw poll. Cool. All those in favor of concurring with the Senate proposal of amendment? All those opposed? Great, that looks like 10-0-1 to me. Okay, thanks, team. We're gonna take a break and wait for